In the dense ancient woods that stretched for miles beyond the small village of Dornberg, there was a story whispered in hushed tones, passed down through generations. A tale that had terrified the villagers for centuries, but one they dared not speak of too loudly. For in the heart of the Black Forest, hidden among its twisted trees and suffocating fog, lived a creature that was no mere myth. The witch. Her name was known by few, spoken only in the most secretive of conversations. Some called her Morgana, others simply referred to her as the Dark One, but all agreed on one thing: she was the source of unimaginable evil. It was said that she had lived in the forest for as long as the trees themselves, a being born of shadow and sorcery. It had been a particularly cold autumn when the village of Dornberg was once again reminded of the witch's presence. A series of strange events had begun to unfold, each more horrifying than the last. Livestock were found dead under mysterious circumstances, their bodies twisted in unnatural ways. Children had gone missing, their last known locations near the edge of the Black Forest. The villagers were terrified, their peaceful lives disrupted by the rising darkness. One evening, as the sun dipped below the horizon and the air grew thick with the scent of pine and damp earth, a young man named Lucas decided to confront the fear that had plagued his village for so long. His sister, Ella, had disappeared just days before, and despite the frantic search, no trace of her could be found. Lucas was determined to find her, to uncover the truth behind the disappearances, no matter the cost. He had heard the stories, of course, but he never believed them, until now. With nothing but a lantern and a small knife at his side, Lucas set out into the Black Forest. The cold air bit at his skin as he walked deeper into the woods, the trees towering above him like silent sentinels. The path grew narrower, the once familiar trail now swallowed by the underbrush. Every snap of a twig underfoot echoed through the stillness, making Lucas's heart race. As he ventured further, the forest seemed to come alive around him. The wind whispered through the branches, carrying voices that sounded almost human. But there was no one there, only the growing sense that he was being watched. Hours passed, and Lucas's mind began to play tricks on him. The shadows stretched unnaturally long, and the silence was deafening. Lucas's steps grew more cautious as he began to question his decision to venture so far. Then he saw it. At first, it was just a flicker in the corner of his eye, a shape that didn't belong. He turned his head quickly, but there was nothing, just the darkness of the trees stretching endlessly before him. But something was different now. The air had become heavier, thicker, as though the forest was closing in on him. And then he heard it. A soft rustling, like the whisper of leaves in the wind. But it was not the wind. The sound came from behind him, faint but distinct. Lucas spun around, his heart pounding in his chest. There, standing in the shadows just beyond the reach of his lantern's light, was a figure, a woman. Her long black hair swayed in the breeze, and her eyes glowed faintly in the darkness. "Morgana," he whispered, the name slipping from his lips without thought. The figure tilted her head, a slow, deliberate movement, as though she were savoring the fear in his voice. "You shouldn't have come," she said, her voice like silk, but laced with an unspoken threat. "This forest is mine, and it will never let you leave." Lucas's blood ran cold. His breath came in shallow gasps as he stared at the witch before him. Her pale skin glimmered in the faint light, her eyes black pits that seemed to devour the very essence of his soul. She was beautiful in an unnatural way, but it was a beauty that could only be found in darkness. He tried to speak, but the words caught in his throat. He could feel the weight of the forest pressing down on him, the trees shifting as if they had a life of their own, as if they were alive and watching him. The air grew colder, and the wind began to howl through the branches. "You cannot save her," Morgana whispered, stepping closer. Her movements were fluid, like a predator closing in on its prey. "Ella is lost, just like all the others who dared enter my domain." Lucas backed away, gripping the knife tightly in his hand, though he knew it would do little against the power of the witch. "I won't leave without her," he said, though the words felt weak even as they left his mouth. Morgana laughed, a low, melodic sound that echoed through the trees like a death knell. "You think you can defy me?" she said. "I control the forest. I am its heart, its soul, and now you are mine." With a flick of her hand, the forest seemed to come alive. The trees groaned and twisted, their branches reaching out like clawed hands, closing in around Lucas. He stumbled back, fear seizing him, as the very ground beneath his feet seemed to shift, becoming unstable, as though the earth itself was alive and eager to consume him. Suddenly a shadow moved in the distance, a figure stumbling out of the darkness. Lucas's heart leapt. It was Ella. She was alive, but there was something wrong with her. Her once bright eyes were now dull, hollow, like those of a creature not entirely human. Her body moved as if controlled by something else, her limbs jerking unnaturally as she approached. "Ella!" Lucas cried, rushing toward her, but she stopped, her head turning slowly toward him. Her mouth opened, but no sound came out. Instead, her eyes locked onto his, and in that moment, Lucas saw it, the curse. Morgana's magic had taken hold of her, twisted her soul into something unrecognizable. "You cannot save her," Morgana repeated, her voice cold and final. "She belongs to the forest now, just like you will." Lucas fell to his knees, desperation flooding his mind. He had come to save his sister, but now it was clear there was no escape. The witch, the forest, it was all one and the same. They were bound together, trapped in an eternal cycle of death and rebirth. As the forest closed in, Lucas realized with a cold finality that no one ever truly left the Black Forest. The witch's curse was eternal, and it would claim all who dared to challenge it. The last thing Lucas saw before the darkness consumed him was the twisted, sorrowful face of his sister, her hollow eyes staring into his as the forest took its claim. And in the distance, Morgana's voice echoed one final time, carried by the wind through the trees. "You are mine.